So hello, everyone, and welcome to the Climate X Energy Academic Track Sub-Forum event, which is being held as part of GAUC's Graduate Forum and Global Youth Summit on Net Zero Future. My name is Alex Schroeder, and I'm excited to welcome you all here this morning on behalf of Columbia University. Columbia became a member of GAUC in February of 2021, and we are thrilled to be the co-host and organizer of the Climate X Energy Academic Track and today's Sub-Forum event. As most of you know, this year's Graduate Forum is being held alongside several major global climate events, including New York Climate Week, which was held here in New York just a few weeks ago, the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, COP15, and of course, COP26, which is starting next week. While of course we wish we could be doing this in person, it's fantastic to be able to connect virtually with all of you from around the world, from the US to Europe to China and many parts of Asia and beyond. So thank you for all being here today across many time zones. This year's Graduate Summit focuses on the interconnection between climate and four key areas: nature and biodiversity, food and health, energy, and transportation. Today's Climate X Energy Sub-Forum event will feature presentations by a number of the student finalists who wrote research papers on the topic of climate and energy. The goal of this event is to provide student finalists with a platform to share their work and facilitate discussion, collaboration, and the sharing of ideas with participants from around the world. After each presentation, we will have a short Q&A moderated by a Columbia researcher. For those in the audience, please feel free to ask questions in the chat or the Q&A, and we will try to answer those if possible. I'm now just going to provide a quick overview of today's agenda. So as you can see here, first, we're going to start with two of our student presentation sessions and their moderators. You can see the student names here. Following these two presentations, we're going to have a Columbia faculty give a keynote address, Dr. Alissa Park, which is part of Columbia University and also the Columbia Climate School. We're going to follow that with our third group presentation, student group presentations. And then we're going to close the event with some closing remarks from Dean Alex Halliday from Columbia University. So before we move on to the presentations, I just want to thank all the students who are here with us today and also those who are not able to join today's event for their excellent papers and submissions. To achieve the world's goal of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, we have to transform nearly every activity in modern life and across all sectors in the global economy. In particular, it's urgent that we decarbonize our energy systems and pursue renewable energy solutions. So today we're going to hear just that, a range of research from ideas, policies, technologies, and more that address the energy challenge. So we have a great session today. So I want to go ahead and get started. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. So it looks like we were actually missing the first student who was supposed to give a presentation. So we're going to have to mix the agenda up a little bit. So I would like to invite student number 2 from, actually before I do that, let me introduce the moderator for our first session. So we have Justin Ho with us, who is a PhD student in Sustainable Development at the School of International and Public Affairs, which is at Columbia University. He was also one of the reviewers for the academic track papers. So we thank Justin for being here with us today. He will be helping moderate the Q&A sections after each of the student presentations. So Song-hee is not with us currently, I don't think. So we are going to move on to student number 2. So that, apologies if I don't mispronounce this name. Zhenghao Li. Zhenghao Li, are you here? Hi, sorry about the mix. We're going to have to move on to you first because we don't have our other student with us.
Okay. Let me first, okay.
Yeah, no problem. We can. How about while you actually get organized, I'll just give a quick bio for our moderator, Justin Ho. So Justin is a 6-year PhD student in Sustainable Development at Columbia University. He has a background in chemical engineering, organic chemistry, and material science. He worked for a decade in academia and in industry with fuel cells and lithium batteries before venturing into the world of social science. So we're really, really excited to have Justin with us today to help moderate this session.
Okay.
Okay, great. So you're all set. You can go ahead and share your screen when you're ready.
Hello, everyone. My name is Liu Zhenghao, who comes from North China Electric Power University in China. It's my honor to participate in the third GAUC forum. I'm glad to be here to show my research. And my research topic is about a system which is composed of membrane distillation and PBT hybrid system. Along with the rapid process of industry, the freshwater resources have become an important factors on the energy and development. However, this is not enough. More water supply needs to be found. So the seawater desalination has been widely developed. The desalination technologies can be divided into 3 types, and the MD is representative of the third composite technology, and it's a thermal-driven membrane separation technology. The MD also has different types of configurations, and our research focused on the vacuum membrane distillation, which is short for VMD. And as is shown in the figure, you can see that the only water vapor molecules can pass through the pores on the membrane. The salt is forbidden. You may guess that the water quality of the MD may be very high. Yes, you're right. And but MD also has some disadvantages, such as it needs a little hot water, like about 60 to 70 centigrade. How to tackle the hot water? The solar energy for heating is the solution. In this diagram, we established a hybrid model, which is called LCPVT, which is the behind this part, and it can generate electricity by PV cells and recover thermal or say heat by specific channels. And in this way, we can get the outlet temperature of up to 60 centigrade. And we also added some solar thermal concentrators. By this part, it can reach to 60 centigrade. Then this is a hybrid system is established. And the key findings or the conclusions are shown below, and some important figures have been displayed in the right side. You can see that the thermal efficiency of the hybrid system can reach to 56.2%, and the electrical efficiency of the PVT can reach to 15.9% in the experiment. And the MD subsystem pure water yield rate can reach to 0.6 liter per hour in the 1 square meters. And in the next step, we will continue to study some factors which affect the MD water yield rate. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we're going to have Justin join you now for Q&A. Justin, if you want to turn your video on.
Sure. Start my video. Hello. Could you go back to the third? Hey, everyone. Can you go back to your third slide? Sorry.
Okay.
I think it was the one with the diagram. Sorry, I guess it was the second slide. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the gas liquid interface and what kind of materials that you actually use for the membrane itself. If you could expand a little bit on that.
Which part do you want to see? But I can't follow.
I'm sorry. In the bottom right, diagram where you talk about the feed liquid and then that gas liquid surface, which I guess is like a transition layer, and then it's next to this membrane. I was just kind of curious what the types of materials are that are used for the membrane, or is it just kind of like a standard for desalination technologies?
the materials of the membrane for the membrane distillation. Do you want to know this?
Yeah, exactly.
The materials is about the PTFE, but I can't spell the long name, but it's PTFE.
Okay, which is like it's a polymer, or is it a plastic?
It's a composite
okay.
materials.
Got it. And then in the third slide, where you have more of your graphs, thermal efficiency. So how is the thermal efficiency calculated in this case, or is it really just based on the heat output of the water versus the heat input? I guess because
yes, you're right. It is calculated by the water increase, the water temperature increased, and which is and the output is solar irradiation.
Okay. And how is when you've separated the actual salt from the water itself, then what happens? Like, where does the temperature of the salt itself factor into that calculation for the thermal efficiency?
I can't. Can you repeat this question?
Yeah. So my assumption was that the thermal efficiency is based on the temperature of the output water, right? And then your input is, I guess, the amount of solar irradiation that comes into this equation. But is I guess is like the final temperature of the brine itself, is that just a negligible temperature increase of the salt? I guess when you do the separation of the salt and the water itself, like how, like I'm just curious how the thermal efficiency is kind of calculated.
I mean, I meant that you want to ask me whether the salt will affect the thermal efficiency. Isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, does the salt increase in temperature, or the increase in the brine temperature, if that is a component of your thermal efficiency calculation?
Oh, this the salt or say the thermal efficiency. We didn't take the salt in our experiment in this picture, but in the latest experiment, we take the salt water in our experiment, and in that experiment, we get some salt capacity to reflect its I want to say the fresh, or say the desalination rate to prove it. And in this part, we didn't take the salt brain in our experiment.
Got it. Okay.
I think we're out of time, guys. So we're going to move on to our next presentation.
Yeah, thanks for answering my questions. That was great.
So Daniel is next.
Okay, hello, thank you very much for joining. My name is Daniel. I've just finished my master's at Imperial College London, and I'm very excited to be part of this conference. For this presentation, we will take more of a bird's eye perspective and look at the emissions reduction potentials of digital innovations. So why is this research relevant? Firstly, we need to do much more to have good chances of limiting global warming to tolerable levels. Secondly, digitalization has the potential to disrupt the energy system, and we need to make sure that the opportunities from digitalization actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the end. Thirdly, there's a discrepancy between the optimism in policy and industry and a lack of evidence in the scientific community surrounding digital innovation mitigation. This lack of evidence is a result of 3 research challenges. We need to understand complex interactions with technical, economic, social, cultural, and policy systems to evaluate the potentials of these consumer-facing innovations. Furthermore, we need to navigate very high degrees of uncertainty in such a future-oriented study. Finally, we have little experience with these novel innovations at this point, which means that it is hard to obtain data from scientific literature. My research proposes an interdisciplinary approach to address these challenges. I use wedge analysis to quantify the emissions reductions and discuss key drivers and barriers in a qualitative innovation system framework. Expert elicitation allows my study to establish key data points. I analyzed 6 innovations in energy demand sectors, which we can see to the left on the screen. And my study demonstrates that these innovations can reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the European Union by 5% in 2030 and by 12% in 2050, relative to a reference scenario with medium ambition. However, these potentials can only be realized within a favorable macro environment. The study identifies 6 policy priorities. The risks of rebound effects need to be minimized, regulation needs to be harmonized, and equity issues need to be addressed proactively. Regulators should also ensure that electricity markets become more participatory, that broadband internet will cover larger populations more reliably, and that electricity generation is being decarbonized as quickly as possible. In such an ideal future digitalization scenario, the emissions reductions from these innovations can outweigh the emissions from the entire ICT sector, from the electricity consumption, by a factor of 3 in 2030. Ultimately, our task is not to foresee the future, but to enable it. With these words, in the spirit of Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, I would like to conclude the presentation. Thanks a lot.
Great, we'll bring Justin on now for the Q&A session.
Okay, just wanted to start by opening up the floor if there was anybody who had a question. Okay, I don't see any hands raised. Oh, I do. No, I almost did. Okay, I thought I saw a hand raised. Just Chi Zhao.
Hello, can you hear me? Right.
Yes.
Hello.
Okay, so I just have a question regarding the rebound effects. Could you please further illustrate what is rebound effect? I mean, we probably know a rebound effect, but I'll be very glad if you could explain it further. And more important is, what's your conclusion about the rebound effects?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Thanks a lot. I think I have one slide in the backup, which might help that a bit. So obviously there's tons of uncertainty in such a study. And one of these major uncertainties is, how do consumers react to these new innovations being offered on the market? And here in the middle, we looked also at rebound effects, sensitivities in terms of induced demand. So basically this means that new products, new services can create additional demand, which has not been there previously. So for example, if people have smart thermostats for smart climate control at their homes, they might actually use the air conditioning more frequently than before. And what we found, the greatest risks come in these 2 innovations. So in smart climate control and in virtual business travel, where relatively small increases in demand can compromise all the emissions reductions. So basically this means with many digital innovations, but especially with these 2, there is a risk if we don't govern it intelligently, in the end, the emissions might actually increase from that. And there are some options to mitigate these, also in terms of policy choices. I guess carbon pricing is definitely part of the solution. So it should be, a financial disincentive. And then also more deliberation. So the more people are involved in these choices, and the more people, get the opportunity to consider what the impacts of what they're doing are, the better. And I believe that's a very important component to actually market such products and services, not just as an additional thing, but also as something, as a sustainable choice, basically. And this might also reduce the rebound effects a bit.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure.
Alex, do we have time for one more question, or?
Yes, we do. We have a little bit more time in this section because we're missing one of our students.
Oh, okay. All right, any other questions coming from the rest of the forum? So Daniel, on the telecommuting wedge, is that exclusively coming from like the transportation sector?
In this case, it is. So there are many simplifying assumptions we're making. And in this case, we are neglecting any potential shifts in terms of household or office energy consumption. We're saying this should maybe even out itself more or less. So in this case, it's mostly replacing transport behavior. And telecommuting is more focused on everyday commuting, and the virtual business travel is what we're doing right now, basically. So the conferencing.
And I was curious, like the smart air traffic management. Like I guess in the shipping industry, you hear a lot about like the giant container ships, and a lot of when they're idling in port, like they just kind of leave their engines running. But where are the majority of savings coming from the smart air traffic management? Is that like a similar thing where like planes, I guess, are just kind of sitting on the tarmac and using up jet fuel?
Exactly. So it's mostly efficiency increases in all phases of the flight. And this includes minimizing taxi time, more data exchange between airports and aircraft, being able to have less deviations from the optimal flight trajectories, being able to start the descent a little later, but then have a continuous descent without any level flight in the descent path. So basically efficiency gains. And the reason why this is such a large wedge in the long term is that the reference scenario, which is compatible with the 2-degree pathway, still assumes tons of traditional air transport, so still jet fuel being used by 2050. So that's why there's quite some savings there as well.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting, I think that is a really interesting finding, considering that wedge is actually bigger than the virtual business travel. But then like, I think about what the proportion of business travelers are versus like just kind of leisure in general. So I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, and also interesting changes between the short and long-term differences, right? So in the short term, the smart air traffic management doesn't really make a huge difference, but in the long term, it becomes more and more potent, basically, while some other innovations become less potent in the long term.
Well, I wonder also, just kind of forecasting again, like maybe like 30 years in the future, with climate change, are there expectations that weather patterns and winds like shift in a way that would sort of speed up air travel or be more of an impediment, or does it just kind of balance out? I mean, if there's changes in like, I don't know, the trade winds and it causes more things like more turbulence, or like the general direction of airflow, if there's just like higher winds that, in one direction it might speed up the plane, but in the opposite direction it actually like forces them to like go against the wind, and like is that something that's even on the horizon for that calculation of smart air traffic management?
That's a super interesting thought. So we haven't considered that.
Okay.
I guess we also need to be a bit careful, not to be overly optimistic about what's possible, because it's always better to not take a flight than it is to optimize the flying in itself.
Very true.
Trade winds and other things, I'd assuming it might cancel each other out a bit. So basically in one direction, it's a bit quicker and more efficient. In the other, like going from Europe to the US, for example, it's less efficient going against the jet stream. So interesting thought, definitely. So there might be some interactions here also in terms of digital innovations, but I'm assuming rather small overall impacts on emissions.
Okay, great. I think we're
Great.
probably at time. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Thank you.
Okay, so can we bring our next student up?
Hello, everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, now let me begin. Hello, everyone. My name is Xundeng Ye, a doctoral candidate from School of Vehicle and Mobility, Tsinghua University. Today, I'm glad to share my study with you. The topic is modeling the evolution of regional fuel cell vehicle supply chain. Nowadays, the transport sector is one of the major sectors of carbon emissions. The huge pressure of reducing carbon emissions in the transport sector has been accelerating the development of electric vehicles. Fuel cell vehicles are widely considered as one important pillar for global low carbon transition. Breakthroughs have been made in the commercialization process of fuel cell vehicles, while the evolution mechanism remains unclear, impeding the insights into future development. So we established a system dynamic model and conducted a scenario analysis to forecast the supply chain involvement. The basic rationale is that end consumption of fuel cell vehicles determines the consumptions of upstream commodities in the supply chain. Domestic productions of commodities are obtained by using the assumed shares of domestic productions out of global productions. The gaps between the productions and consumptions are filled by international trades. The simulation period is said to be from 2010 to 2050. China is selected as a case of simulation because it has the world's largest vehicle fleet and has a strong ambition to promote fuel cell vehicle development. So we can see that in the baseline scenario, the domestic productions of fuel cell systems and stocks will rise up to 283 and 229 gigawatts. Increasing market penetration will significantly improve productions by more than 40%. Enhancing industrial competitiveness will significantly decrease import dependency rates of upstream commodities. The scarcity of critical metals seriously affects the sustainability of the supply chain. In the baseline scenario, the domestic import will reduce from 65 tons to 24 tons, and it will increase by 5% and 20% when assuming a higher market penetration or a higher industrial competitiveness, respectively. If China further increase imports of platinum-containing scraps and growing end-of-life recycling rates, the domestic supply of refined platinum will no longer dependent on imports. That's my conclusions. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Let's start the Q&A.
Sure. Any hands raised in the participants window? Okay, I don't see any hands raised. Nothing in the chat yet. Okay, so I had a question about, I guess, the graph in the lower left-hand corner with the domestic net platinum import. Is that spike in I guess in 2020, is that all related to like COVID production? The little dip and then it kind of rebounds.
Well, thanks for your question. So in China, there are almost no platinum resources naturally. So in 2020, the enhanced the enhanced laws about the internal combustion vehicles. So the platinum will increase a little bit, but in the long term, the platinum needed in a fuel cell vehicle is lower than needed in a traditional vehicle. So that's a point. So the net import will decrease, and I also assume that the country China will improve the end-of-life recycling rates and increasing imports of scraps. So I think in the long term, the net import of refined platinum will decrease and even decrease to below 0. Yeah.
And this analysis specifically is just for fuel cell vehicles and not looking at possibly, I don't know how much platinum actually goes into regular like electric vehicles, like the lithium ion or lithium metal kind of vehicles as well. But I assume that there's like rare metals that are needed there as well. That, I guess that increase in electric vehicles based on lithium ion technology, that isn't affected, or that isn't included, I guess, in this scenario of like recycling and possibly like if there's more platinum that is imported into China as a result of more electric vehicles versus like the reduction in like the internal combustion engine vehicles, is that expected to have any impact, I guess, on the amount of platinum recycling as the car fleet kind of changes in the next, I guess, 2 or 3 decades?
Yeah, maybe I will show the next. So from this picture, that's part of my study. So we can see that from 2010 to 2015, that's the situation in China. We can see that the platinum needed in fuel cell may be accounted for 50%, and maybe another 15% for traditional vehicle. So in automotive industry, account for 30%.
Okay, that's amazing on that top right graph that there's a wedge for jewelry and investment as well. That's yeah, that's awesome, because that gives a little bit more like context and perspective about relatively what the size of the wedges are. Thank you for that.
I think we're probably going to have to wrap up. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Okay, great. So we are actually going to move on to our next round of student presentations. So before we do that, I would like to introduce the moderator for the next round. So thank you, Justin, so much for helping. Your Q&A was fantastic. We really appreciate your participation.
Yes, thank you for all the presenters, whatever time zone you're in. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night.
Yeah, exactly. Fantastic. So the next moderator for our section is Dr. Michael Waite, who is an associate research scientist at the Quadrici, I may have pronounced that wrong, Sustainable Engineering Lab at the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences at Columbia University. So thank you, Michael, for being with us today. I said this to the others, but I will let you know when we've ended the presentation and we're starting the Q&A, and just ask you to turn your video on at that point. So I would like to invite the first student from our next group to join us now on video. Again, I am very sorry for all of my Chinese pronunciation, so please feel free to correct me if I mispronounce your name. But Ang Wan, you are going to be next.
It's me, Ang Xuan, A-N-G.
Yeah, see, I'm very sorry. Please correct me. Thank you so much.
All right. And let me share my screen. Okay. Can I start the presentation?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. It's my great honor to participate in the third GAUC graduate forum. My name is Xuan, a master student from Tsinghua University. And my presentation is about planning for electricity gas-coupled integrated energy system with CCUS considering global carbon tax and carbon price. First, let me introduce the concept of CCUS business model briefly. The CCUS involve carbon capture from fuel combustion or industrial process. Uncaptured carbon dioxide is subject to the mandatory penalty in the form of carbon tax. Captured carbon dioxide is transported by vehicles or pipelines or permanently stored underground. In the emission trading system, the captured carbon dioxide can also be traded. Moreover, captured carbon dioxide can also be utilized as a resource to create valuable products or services. Thus, based on the current business model, we propose a coupling model combined traditional thermal power plant, carbon capture, carbon storage, and power to gas technology to retrofit into carbon capture power plant, in which emission from TTPP is flowed into CCUS, and the captured carbon dioxide is either used for P2G to produce methane or sale to carbon market. The natural gas generated by P2G can be delivered into the gas network to relieve the gas supply pressure. And then the IEEE 24 bus electric system and the Belgian 20-node natural gas system are implied to verify the effectiveness of proposed model. It can be concluded from the left figure that the investment tends to rise as carbon price decreases and carbon tax increases. It's reasonable under the current business model. And the trend of total cost along with carbon prices and taxes is further analyzed, in which surface in pink color represents the total cost without CCUS. Generally speaking, while the value of carbon price is larger than $40 per ton, the proposed model is approachable globally. But it's worth mentioning that the carbon price in most parts of the world are still below $40 per ton at present. And the report from World Bank has pointed out that the carbon price level of $50 per ton to $100 per ton is required to effectively reduce emissions. So we believe that facing the policy foundation of a gradual increase in carbon prices, the retrofitting planning model could have a great potential in the future. Okay, thanks for listening. That's all my presentation.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm going to invite Michael to join you for Q&A.
Okay, thank you. I guess my first question is you talk about the carbon prices at which this type of approach would be viable. How would that compare, though, to kind of alternatives for reducing emissions, such as just replacing coal-fired power with renewable resources? At the carbon tax, that it starts to make sense to do CCUS, should someone just look to other resources aside from coal?
Yeah, I have to admit that this model haven't considered the renewable energy resource until now. And the carbon price, this is a quite simple model. The carbon price is added to the objective function. And the carbon, as well as the carbon tax is also added in the objective function. So they are all located at the second stage of the model. The first stage is about investment cost. So we add the investment cost and operational cost in total to calculate the total cost.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense to focus on the thermal plants as you do here. I assume that it has a lot to do with the capacity factor and the utilization of those plants as to whether it makes sense to do the CCUS. Does that affect things, and does it in such a way that it's at a reasonable capacity factor of the plant that you would actually see the CCUS make economic sense?
Yeah, yes, I think so. There are so many ways to retrofit the carbon capture power plant, and the power to gas technology is just a kind of way, and we can consider more ways of carbon capture, carbon storage, or carbon utilization. So I think this way, this model is quite general to retrofit the traditional thermal power plant.
And then you go from the carbon captured to methane. I'm assuming there's a hydrogen source. Where's the hydrogen come from?
It comes from it comes from the, let me see. Oh, the H2 is comes from other resources, such as we can. Sorry, I haven't considered this. The H2, yeah. But we consider the H2 in is a variable. It bought from other resources. Yeah.
It would be interesting to see how this fits into an overall kind of system approach, where you might use the hydrogen might be produced from excess renewables, and that would also let you know what capacity factor you're working with. But thank you.
Great, thanks. We're out of time for the Q&A, so thank you both so much. Okay, great. So let's invite the next student up, Anasuya.
Yes, hello. I'll just share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity. My name is Anasuya. I am from Divecha Center for Climate Change, Indian Institute of Science. I'm going to talk about hybridization of solar and wind, how that can help us in avoiding energy drought. Now, what do we mean by energy drought? Energy drought means no generation days or very low generation days. That can actually severely impact the electricity grid, our future electricity grid, which will be renewable rich. That means there will be a lot of renewable in that grid. So here we see, taking India as a case study, because India is having really an ambitious goal for solar and wind. So we take India as a case study, and then we analyze whether the hybridization can help. Like individual sources will be having energy droughts, whether hybridization can reduce the number of drought days. That is the objective of our study. Coming to the methodology now. So we used ERA 5 data, but however, that is limited to 41 years of data. So historical data are limited, and rare events cannot be captured based on only those historical data. So we have used a stochastic weather generator that was developed by Imperial College. It's called IMAGE, to have a longer time series for wind speed as well as solar irradiance. And then we have converted it to the generation using power curves provided by manufacturers. Coming to the key findings. So the left-hand side plots show our key findings. So these are two locations. One is Rajasthan, which is in northern India, and another one is South India. So these are two particular locations. And the time period we chose for our calculation is June, July, August, and September, JJAS, because that is the high wind generation month. So because in India, wind is seasonal and the generation is really available during this period. So what this plots in the left-hand side shows is the wind number of the y-axis as drought days as percentage of total days. So wind droughts are much more, like the number of days are much more compared to solar, which is green line here. Same thing is true for South India as well. So wind blue line is much higher compared to solar. However, when we combine these two, or there is a hybridization, in Rajasthan, the behavior is different than northern India. So we see that still this red line, which signifies the combined generation, has more number of drought days compared to solar. However, here in South India, we see that the red line is below the green. That means even the combination has lesser number of drought days compared to even solar, although solar performs better than wind. So these are the main findings, which shows that selective hybridization, that means in particular region, hybridization can help us more with these droughts. And another thing, I'm not showing the plot here, but we have worked out that when these rare droughts, so hybridization made it rarer, but when the rare droughts do occur, the other regions continue to generate electricity. So this has a policy implication, basically, definitely two policy implications. The first one is incentivizing the installation of solar wind hybrid plants on a region-specific basis, where we can get more benefit in terms of avoiding droughts. And another thing is to have a nationwide strong grid connection. So inter-regional strong grid connection. This will help us to avoid the droughts when these rare droughts do occur. Thank you so much. That's all.
Thank you so much. I'll invite Michael for the Q&A.
Thank you for that presentation. I'd be interested in reading your paper. I wonder, have you looked at all at how hydropower in India might balance this, especially since there is some storage capacity of hydropower in the northeast of the country, especially if you're extending this to kind of renewable energy power sharing across the country. I'm curious how that might play into this.
Hydro plants definitely would help in balancing the system because right now they are doing this balancing activity with whatever we have the capacity right now in India. But one thing we have to understand that they are fixed by the topography or geography of the country. So we can't possibly increase it any further. And there is issue of environmental clearances also, even though you have good geographic location, that there will be forest and other things. So you can't increase India's hydro capacity. So it is kind of fixed right now, whatever we have. But the renewable is going to increase drastically. So then it becomes a problem and we need to think how to stabilize our grid in all sort of situations.
True. Thanks. Alex, I don't know if we have time for more.
We have about 30 seconds. So if you want to provide any comments, we probably don't have time for another question.
Okay. Maybe you can comment on this or think about this, but I read this and I wonder, the difference between a hybrid wind and solar plant where it's controlled by one entity and the kind of policy system level thinking that would be needed if you've got independent installers or developers of wind and solar and how to integrate those. And I get the sense from your last bullet point there that you are thinking about how this might function in those two different ways, where one entity controls the hybrid plant and a second situation where they're different entities, but the grid system needs to handle it. I mean, obviously this doesn't change the figures you show, but it does change the way you think about the implications of your work.
Yeah, so right now policies are there which focus on only the potential of wind and solar at a particular location. So policy for hybrid also considers only the potential. They don't consider these drought situations and how the balancing can be done. So my point is I want to propagate this idea that you should look at this also while you decide about hybrid plants.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Great, thank you both so much. Okay, we're going to move on to the next student, Gao Hanbo.
Yeah, let me share my screen. Okay, could you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, hello everyone. I'm Gaohan Bo from School of Environment, Tsinghua University, and I'm very happy today to be here to give a speech on the topic of environmental burden shift from air pollutants to solid waste in China's coal-fired electricity sector under the carbon neutral goal. So firstly, I would very quickly give a research background. As environmental researchers, we all know that the coal-fired power sector emitted a large amount of air pollutants and carbon dioxide in history. And to deal with that, in 2015, the state government requested all the coal-fired power plants in China must be upgraded with ultra-low emission standards and energy-saving transformation. And this strategy gets very great results. But what is the underlying serious problem is that the cleaner flue gas also generated more solid waste through the environmental burden shift. So the study first focuses on the long-term serious dynamic metabolism and environmental impacts of air to solid burden shift in coal-fired power plants. And on the other hand, the solid waste from coal-fired power sector can be effectively utilized into the building materials sector through industrial symbiosis. So the study then researched the industrial symbiosis potentials and emission reduction benefits of pollutants and greenhouse gas emissions between the coal-fired power and building materials sectors. And on the right shows the main methodology of the research. We first model the solid waste generation based on the unit level power plants in China. And then we model the industrial symbiosis based recycling strategies into those building materials sectors. And based on those results, we finally uncovered the environmental benefits using the life cycle assessment methodology. And these are my main results. The first graph shows the cumulative stock and spatial heterogeneity of the solid waste in China. We can see that in the history, the power plants has generated a large amount of air solid waste, especially entering into the 21st century. With a more cleaner flue gas, we also get a very high increase in the solid waste. And in future, this constraint of carbon neutrality cannot effectively reduce the discharge of coal-fired power solid waste through the scenario analysis, and the enormous stock sourcing imbalance and locking effects need urgent promotion of air to solid co-governance in the sector. And the second graph shows the main pathways of the solid waste recycled into building material sector. And its corresponding recycling potentials under various decommissioning scenarios of the power plants. We can see that fly ash will become the main source of coal-fired power solid waste, 70% of the total stock, but its utilization needs production of cement and building blocks can bring significant environmental benefits, which has technical feasibility and should be attached most importance to. And we finally give the suggestion that tailored policies could first emphasize the northern provinces with more serious source link imbalance, such as Shandong and Inner Mongolia. Technical standards and economic incentives need to be issued to promote the effective recycle of coal-fired power solid waste. And that's, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you for your listening.
Thank you so much. I'll invite Michael to join you for Q&A.
Thank you for the presentation. You notice, looking at your figures and reading what you and listening to you, that there's pretty significant imbalances from one region to another. And I think you made this point that the kind of source of these materials would be different than where they might best be utilized. Does the kind of cost carbon emissions of moving the recyclables from source to sink kind of outweigh any benefit of that? Are there alternatives? And I guess if not, if it still makes sense, what type of economic incentives would actually drive that kind of shift in materials from one location and industry to another location and industry?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you very much. And we can see from this GIS map that in the northern provinces, they generated much more solid waste in coal-fired power plants. But I mean, because its recycling potential is relatively small compared to the southern provinces, because in winter, the temperature is very low, and those building works cannot still continue, so the building materials demand is lower than the southern provinces. That's a source sink imbalance I would like to stress. So to deal with that, the policies I would like to stress is such as to give some subsidies to those solid waste recycling in the northern provinces, and then the building material sectors would like to recycle more solid waste because its quality is relatively lower than the normal materials, but it can still be utilized according to the current technology. Yeah. Thank you.
So is there examples of that kind of transfer happening at any significant scale across these kinds of distances? Have you looked at other places that this might be happening?
Actually, it still doesn't exist in many examples, but we think that it is feasible in future, because nowadays those policymakers still think that the solid waste cannot be utilized in the building materials due to some, technical constraints. They think that this may leak some pollutants into the environment. But we conducted some, the experiments and deployed some literature review and found that this is a possible way and already applied in many foreign countries, because the recycling rate of the solid waste in Western countries is already very high, like more than 70 or to 80%, but in China, it's still at a very low level.
I think we're out of time for Q&A for this.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, we're going to invite our next student, Johanna Janelle.
Hello. I will share my screen. Can you now see the full screen?
Yes, I see topic at the top. Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay, so hello everybody. I'm Johanna from the University in Freiberg in Germany. And until now we've heard a lot about technical aspects, and our paper covers more the commercial part of how corporates can get access to renewable energy. So I'm very happy to present some key findings of the paper I've worked together with my colleague Steffen Hund. We are coming from the following problem. The Chinese electricity production still heavily relies on fossil energy sources like coal, and a high proportion of this carbon-intensive electricity mix is forwarded to the industry and service sectors under standard utility contracts. But there's an increasing pressure from stakeholders, especially from investors, on the corporates to reduce their carbon footprint. So one way to do so is to sign a power purchase agreement or in short a PPA, and directly buy renewable electricity from a producer of renewable electricity, for example, a wind power plant or a solar plant. However, according to RE100 members, mainland China is one of the most challenging markets for sourcing renewables. So our thesis statement was that there are still regulatory market barriers which hamper the development of the Chinese PPA market. And against this backdrop, the aim of our research was to identify these market barriers, and we therefore conducted an exploratory analysis of policies covering the renewable electricity market, like, for example, the notice on the renewable portfolio standard. We also analyzed previous studies on the topic of PPAs and came to the result that these studies mainly covered the concept of levelized cost of electricity. So an analysis of the regulatory framework regarding PPAs is quite new. Our research identifies several market barriers, like, for example, the Green Electricity Certificate Scheme, which allows for double counting. Double counting means that for 1 megawatt hour of green electricity, instruments like greenhouse gas offsets can be issued alongside the green electricity certificates. So it's not possible for the corporates to make exclusive attribute claims for this megawatt hour of green electricity they were buying. And therefore, the system is not fully accepted by international organizations like RE100, and which means that the procurement of these certificates is also not attractive for the corporates. Another main challenge is the current short-term tenor of PPAs of only 1 year in most cases, which is reducing the bank's incentives to provide long-term capital for projects. And this leads to a lower leverage and therefore negatively affects the profitability of the projects. So renewable energy asset owners also tend to prefer the currently available 20-year supply contract with the grid company instead of contracting a PPA with a private institution. So to sum it up, our findings show that there are market barriers which are hampering the or there's a lack of incentives both on the sell side and the buy side to enter into PPAs. Okay, thanks.
Okay, great. I'll invite Michael for Q&A. And then is Stefan also going to join for Q&A? I thought maybe.
Yeah, I'm also okay. Joining. Sorry for the background noise. I'm sitting in a train. I mute my microphone again in order not to bother you too much, okay?
Great, thank you.
So thank you for the presentation and thanks for summarizing kind of these main barriers. What are kind of the policy prescriptions, and these are issues that have been tackled in other places. So what are the ways that you see of actually addressing these market barriers or these structural barriers to allowing this scheme?
I would say China already made a great step in 2021 for tackling these issues, especially in terms of lack of long-term PPAs. The current status quo of the market, I would say, is if I got your question right, Michael, you're asking for the current status of the regulation, right?
Or solutions to these problems, yeah.
Yeah, the solution for these problems should definitely be that China should implement a higher degree of direct procurement options on a provincial level, right? China is functioning in a way that there is the government setting under the 5-year plan the emission target. This is then transformed down on the provincial level. And then that's pretty much it, because the grid companies are taking care of this one. And the regulation should exactly tackle on a provincial level, allowing for corporates to have these options to directly involve themselves in the procurement of renewable energy. So one solution is definitely to adjust the current framework on a provincial level, and to set a kind of centralized solution for the next step of renewable energy liberalization.
If I could maybe take a step back too. So there's this issue of, structural barriers to corporates, entering power purchase agreements, but to what degree is that necessary for China to meet its renewable energy goals? Or is this just kind of one strategy to think about, or is the kind of barriers that you're identifying here, causing a situation where it's making it harder for China to meet its renewable energy goals?
I would say, how China can realize its decarbonization goals really is one by one related to the corporates being active in China, right? So corporates worldwide need to address under the new upcoming regulations, like the EU taxonomy, for example, under certain sustainability rating aspects, they need a proactive involvement in transparently show how to decarbonize. And we see that this brings forward and triggers new investment in renewable energy. So from our perspective, with this step of opening the market for power purchase agreements, China will definitely accelerate its energy transition because new investments from the corporate sector, from the private sector will flow in. Right now, it is more the case that the capital allocation is more coming from a centralized governmental way. So PPA is definitely a good accelerator. We see this in the US, we see this in continental Europe, that corporates are actively looking for those contracts. And in China right now, it's in the current regulation very difficult and very much related with high regulatory risk. And this should be tackled by the policymaker in order to incentivize and accelerate the corporate decarbonization. Does this tackle your question, Michael?
Yeah, it continues the conversation. We don't have much time though.
Yeah, I think we're out of time, but thank you both so much, or thank you all three of you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you to everyone who presented in that section. And also thanks so much to Michael for your help moderating. Fantastic. So we are actually going to move on to the next section of our event. And I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Alissa Park, who is a Lamvest Earth Institute Professor of Climate Change, the Director of the Lamvest Center for Sustainable Energy at the Earth Institute, and the Chair of the Department of Earth and Environmental Engineering and the Department of Chemical Engineering at Columbia University. Thank you so much, Alissa, for joining us, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Alexis. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. So as you just heard, I think that my name is attached to a lot of earth and environment. So you can kind of guess what research I do and what I'm really passionate about. So first, let me introduce myself a little bit beyond what just got introduced. So I'm working on a lot of research in the area of carbon management. I joined Columbia University as a faculty in 2007 and became the director of the Lamvest Center for Sustainable Energy in 2014. So we have been doing a lot of interesting work around engineered solutions on how to capture and store and also even utilize carbon dioxide in natural and environmental systems. First of all, before I introduce our work in the center, I'd like to congratulate all the students and their participations in this interesting student forum. It's great to see. I was listening on some of the talks, and perspective in global perspective on these various topics has been very interesting to hear about. So it's good to see all of you are here, although it's virtual, talking about important topics. And also, I'm very happy to introduce and participate in this forum as to represent Columbia University. Maybe you already heard, Columbia University has been leading the discussion on climate change for decades and more. And the effort started with the Earth Institute. And in fact, that my center, Lamvest Center for Sustainable Energy, is part of the Earth Institute. Now, Earth Institute and our center is moving to the climate school, the new Columbia Climate School. As you can see, our commitment towards the climate school and climate change mitigation is tremendous. But I think what I really like to tell you today a little bit is how to really provide engineered solutions. So let me share a few slides here. So hopefully you can see. So what is the mission of Lamvest Center? Our mission is to advance science and develop innovative technologies that provide sustainable energy for all humanity while maintaining the stability of the Earth and natural systems. When you think about it, coal or natural gas or all those fossil resources, they're not really bad materials. The way we've been using those natural resources was the incorrect way, because we weren't really thinking about the environment while utilizing these resources. So last 100 years and more, we really developed this modern society with a lot of built-in infrastructure, and as well as we were able to use the chemicals and materials and fuels to really enhance and improve our lives for healthier life, better life, more food for everyone, and all that so on. This would not have happened with all these high energy density fossil resources. But now we have to really look into future. Your generation really need to start thinking about how can we sustain this life with all these resources, with clean water, all the energy, without really impacting or creating environmental impacts. And in particular climate change, in order to really do that, we still have to use carbon. There is no question about it, but the carbon has to be non-fossil resources and has to be circular. So looking at this figure on the bottom right, you can see where all the carbon is in the entire environmental systems and engineer systems. You see where the cities are, where we are, but it's all connected. So at Columbia University, there are many researchers really looking at various aspects of how these carbons move around in different cycles of natural and engineered systems, and can we really enhance the capture of these CO2 either chemically or mechanically, or by enhancing the natural system uptaking CO2 by water or by trees, many aspects of this. And one of the most important part of Columbia University is that we are not only looking at different aspects of these, we are really good at looking at how they're linked to each other. And having this highly interdisciplinary institute and centers like Earth Institute and Lamvest Center is providing that opportunity for students to really looking at what is the key questions to ask and answer at the interfaces. So just for example, if you really look into the future, we want to create the entire society still based on carbon, which does not have climate change impact, we have to look at non-fossil carbon sources. And there are only few options we have. So either you can get carbon from air or ocean. As you can see here, there are pockets of carbon we can harvest. You can go through a biological route. It could be terrestrial or marine biomass. By combining those non-fossil carbon with the renewable energy, we can create the entire energy and material sector for the future. We are just at the beginning of this whole transition, which will take decades. And all the things you're learning now and then thinking about passionately will play a critical role. So if you look here, this is the specific examples of the projects we are working on at Columbia University. Many professors and students are passionately looking at. As you can see, we do still need chemicals and materials and fuels for our society. We'll use them, and eventually you'll end up in the air or ocean or the soil, many different environmental areas and different sectors. What we really want to do in this blue bubble is creating a new circular carbon economy by only having input of renewable energy and waste CO2 or carbon, creating carbon capture, conversion cycle that really complete the new cycle, has no fossil carbon input into the system. So some of the examples of projects are here. We develop new materials, new catalysts, and we even decarbonize the built environment by making new construction materials. We can also store carbon in geological formations. And during all these, we are also integrating resource recovery, for example, critical elements for the future. And I think some of you are talking about. And all these aspects has to be discussed together, combined with each other. So the systems engineering, process intensification, as well as discussing these with economics and policy researchers are really critical for deployment of these technologies. Hope I was able to give you a little bit of a background on what we are really interested in, what we are looking for. But as you can imagine, that the scale of this problem is huge. So without really having new way of thinking about these engineered solutions, we're not going to get there. Most of technologies takes from your idea to commercialization takes about 2 decades. Hopefully with the brilliant minds like yours, we can really condense the time scale a little bit shorter and we can get there sooner. So congratulations on all your effort, and I look forward to more conversations with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alissa. That was fantastic. I'm excited to announce that we can move on to our next round of student presentations, our third and final round. So before we do that, I would like to introduce the moderator for the third session. So Hadia Shirazi is a research associate at the Center for Global Energy Policy, which is Columbia at SEPA, but also exists within the Climate School. So thank you, Hadia, for your help. I will invite you to join the Q&A sessions after each of the presenters. So I'd like to invite our first student, Yi Chen, to begin your presentation.
I'd like to share my screen. Okay, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. It's my honor here to have a chance to present at this forum. My name is Yidan Chen from Tsinghua University. Today, I'd like to share the results of our research named Declining Renewable Costs, Emission Trading and Economic Growth, China Power System at the Crossroads. Let's start from the traditional economic perspective that mitigating climate change is likely to have a small but negative impact on economic growth. We usually find from the literature that there would be 0.2 to 1% GDP loss if we have the climate policies such as the emission trading schemes. However, climate change mitigation and economic growth is no longer at odds if we consider some new trends. For example, the rapid decline of the renewable costs, especially the wind and solar, as the figure shows. And also some increase in purchasing power for households and companies, and other co-benefits such as the the technology spillovers and also health benefits. Our results would enhance the climate policies, such as the neutrality goals and also emission peaks in China and in other areas of the world. We use a CGE model to simulate these scenarios. We have these two scenarios for different speeds of the productivity improvements in renewables, and also these two mitigation scenarios, which stands for 50 or 60% of emission constraints, and other three potential scenarios for expenditure shifting and accommodating labor market and technology spillovers. Here's our results. It shows that all enhanced renewable scenarios grow China's economy compared with the BAU scenario that assumes slower renewable cost improvements and no emission trading schemes. And also we can find from the figure here that especially in the case scenario which has the assumption on the consumption shifting, we can find that it benefits both the GDP and also employment, because the cost saved from the energy will spend in the services area, which have more employment demand. Here is our results. First is that the economic benefits of renewable energy now exceed their direct costs. And the other is that the energy cost saving would benefit the GDP and also its employment.
Okay, great. Is that the end?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to invite Hadia to join for the Q&A session.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Yichen. That was very interesting. So I would like to start by asking, what is the most important takeaway from your research in your perspective?
It's like we can find from here. It shows that the first result is that even though in the most strict constraint on the emissions, we can also find positive impacts because of the rapid increase in the technology part. It's like the improvements in productivity would benefit a lot to the economics. And the second is that if we considered these three scenarios stands for three different points of potential benefits. And this one is mainly for the consumption shifting that I mentioned before. Is about if we have a more energy cost saving, and people in for the household and also the companies, they will spend more in the services area, and it will further improve the economics and also the employment. These are the two results mainly gained from this research.
Thank you. And in your opinion, what would be the next steps for your research?
Yes, it's like we consider here is mainly assumptions in the productivity improvements in the renewables. However, we didn't take them into like a system about how resistant if the gradings or not just the technology. And also another part to mention is that we consider here mainly about the wind and the solar technology for making the electricity, but we did not take into consider the battery part, like the energy storage. So maybe that's the next step.
Thank you, Yichen. Everything, Alex.
You're welcome.
Great, thank you both so much. I would like to move on to our next student, please.
Okay, hello, I'm Lu Xijia from Shanghai Jiao Tong University. Today I'm talking about China's new effort under the goal of carbon neutrality, boosting new energy industry with the carbon market. New energy is the leading force to achieve carbon neutral, since China needs to find the balance between the promoting economic growth and decreasing carbon emission. The structural reform of the energy industry is the top priority. On July, China just launched the national carbon market, which further shows our strong determination to achieve carbon neutral. More importantly, this carbon market has pushed China's new energy industry to the draft. On the one hand, the carbon market reflects the policy guidance, that is, the government's determination to deal with climate change. New energy enterprises need these state expectations to make long-term investment. Also, this policy correspondingly increased the cost of the competitors so as to strengthen the competitiveness of new energy enterprises. The mechanism behind is about the positive externalities. That is, new energy can improve the environment. However, if there's no policy, the third party who enjoys the environmental benefit usually does not have to pay. In the past, China internalized externalities in the form of subsidies, but subsidies also have various problems. For example, it brings huge financial pressure to the government. Starting the carbon market is based on the more flexible market mechanism so as to find the social cost of carbon. And according to the survival of the fittest, carbon price as an effective signal will force the upgrading of China's energy structure. So based on this analysis, we use Granger causality test to verify the causal relationship between carbon price and the stock price of new energy enterprises. And we find that, that there is a positive correlation between them. And statistically speaking, the carbon price is the cost to the stock price of new energy enterprises. So a well-functioning carbon market is inseparable. However, China just launched the national carbon market 3 months ago. Our government is still in the exploratory stage on how to make better use of the invisible hand. So new energy industry has stood in the drought, but whether it can catch the wind and take off smoothly still face many challenges. I also put forward some policy suggestions like legislation first to effectively supervise enterprises and set a clear cap to bring about strict baselines, mandatory company disclosure to save the information asymmetry, and innovative trading system should be introduced, such as the improved CA quota and the CCER offset mechanism. Also, building a community of shared future for mankind is the only solution to the global climate change. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll invite Hadia to join for Q&A.
Thank you, Alex. This was great, very interesting topic. One question I have is you mentioned that they were the need for, I think if you could go back to the second to last slide, the one with the pyramid. What are some of the barriers to the legislation that you were talking about, if you could share that? Yes, that one. So where it says no high-level legal force, what are some of the barriers to having legislation?
Okay, now in China, like when we come to the ownership of goods, we have such laws to identify the ownership of goods. But when it comes to the carbon emission right, nowadays we still don't have such certain laws. We just have some regulations, which is without this high level legal force. So it is a barrier to the national carbon market now.
Great. And what would be the next steps in your research?
Okay, because we take the Granger causality test to verify the relationship between the carbon price and the stock price of new energy enterprises. But here we only take the one new energy index as an example. So as I mentioned just now, our carbon price is not in the future. There's still a great space for the carbon price to grow. And whether our research will still be suitable for the future. So we need further analysis. Yeah.
Thank you. I think back to Alex.
Yes, thank you both so much. Thank you for your presentation. That was great. So I'm going to ask our next student to join us. So if we can stop sharing the screen. Thank you so much. So our next student, Elena, please, you can start your presentation.
Oh, yeah, unmute myself. Okay. Does everyone hear me? Is it okay?
Yes, we can hear you and we can see your screen.
Perfect. So hello, everyone. I'm very glad to be here today with you all and to listen to such interesting presentations. My name is Elena. I'm a PhD student at Sciences Po in Paris. My broader research is on conceptualizing the responsibility of transnational enterprises. And today I'm going to be presenting the specific topic of transnational enterprises reform and energy systems. Also, to go to the next slide. Sorry, yeah. So the topic we'll deal with today is greener energy policies and transnational enterprise influence. So I'm focusing on public policies because there is a need nowadays for a joint effort from all stakeholders to reduce carbon emissions and head towards net zero. And energy systems are crucial to implement the systemic change needed to reduce the emissions. The thesis statement that I defend in my article or my paper is that the Energy Charter Treaty and the International Investment Law need to change and to evolve to enable ecological transition towards greener energy systems, because they are nowadays being used by enterprises to actually deter states from changing their public policies. The research methodology I use is interdisciplinary. So on the one hand, I have interdisciplinary literature review, which means that I will look at different resources from a variety of fields, law, political, philosophy, economy, to try to bring together the perspective from scholars, all different scholars, to get a holistic view of the way transnational enterprises can influence different state policies. Then I also look at arbitration cases. This means there is real life cases of arbitrations happening between states and investors from transnational companies. And this enables me to get an idea of the way previous policies have been challenged by investors using the ECT, for example. And finally, the third instrument I draw from on my research is investigative journalism, which actually is an interesting tool to challenge the awards granted by the cases, the arbitration cases that I saw in the second point. The key findings of the paper are threefold. First of all, there's a regulatory chill in a warming world, which means that the Energy Charter Treaty and investor protection mechanisms are being misused. States are being taken to courts because of their policies. And since we need a rapid and decisive action towards net zero emissions, there is an urgent need for reform. And one suggestion I make in the paper is a political risk insurance. There's also a need to move towards full cost accounting standards to overcome the way enterprises manage to fragmentate their responsibility for environmental harm, for example. And finally, I defend that responsibility attribution is a social practice, and also to include individuals and make that possible for them to engage. So there's a need for new narratives to have people realize that it's not only a systemic problem, and that we can also play our role in heading towards greener energy systems. And thank you, everyone. That was the presentation.
Great, thank you so much. I'll invite Hadia to join for the Q&A.
Thank you, Elena. Very interesting paper and a very interesting topic. So one question that comes to mind immediately is how would these accounting standards be applied? How would they gain acceptance across so many different countries?
Yeah. So there is actually a lot of discussion about these different standards. And for example, I think it was this summer, the G7 decided that the TCFD, one standard regarding carbon only was going to become like internationally recognized for multinational companies to have this. And I think that they will become, international, because investors actually look for this, for this type of information in enterprises files, because they have realized that climate change is a risk and that they need to, invest in sustainable companies to make sure that their assets will not become stranded, which means that because of a new policy or because of the fact that future energies like carbonized energies will become very expensive, that their asset will lose value. So they need to prevent this. And that's why there's a increasing push towards this. And what I mean by full cost accounting responsibility, I have a slide here, just in case. And the fact is that we need to switch the way we think about it. And since we have already the financial capital and this that we already report on balance sheet, that should be a new term of like environmental capital. And it will be a debt towards the environment, the same time that we have a debt towards like shareholders, well, the ones that have invested. So it will be like enlarging the way we think about capital.
Thank you. And what would be the next steps in your research?
So one of the things I really want to look forward is when I talk about, I haven't put it here, but about political risk in insurance. I think that it could be like a very promising, alternative to investor state dispute settlements. But I want to like dig further, because I know that it's being used in the developing world, but more regarding violence and expropriation. And I would like to explore, and also maybe through interviews, like talking with people that already implement this kind of insurances in other like fields, to see whether it will be like implementable in this kind of field, to see that it's actually a really feasible solution.
Thank you, Elena. I think back to you, Alex.
Yes, great. Thank you both so much. Thanks for that fantastic presentation. Okay, and I would like to invite our final student to give their presentation, Ji Zhao. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, okay, I heard you. Great, and I'm very happy and honored. Could you see my screen now? Okay, good.
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah, I'm really happy and honored to be the last one today to share my research regarding the climate sustainability assessment of the power sector in the Belt and Road countries. So the keywords include first, the Climate Sustainability Index, which is an evaluation system that we designed in this research to evaluate the sustainability of power systems in each country. And another topic is Belt and Road. In case you don't know, Belt and Road is a multilateral economic cooperation platform proposed by China. And energy, especially electricity, power generation, plays a very important role in Belt and Road initiative. So here we come to our thesis statement. The thesis statement is that we find Belt and Road countries, especially developing countries, are under the due pressure to meet the demand for electricity and to achieve the low carbon development of electricity. So what's our methodology? Our framework is MCA, which means multi-criteria analysis. So basically we select a large number of quantitative indicators and we choose some of the most representative and viable ones, and we calculate some scores for each country by a numerical calculation. And we have to calculate those scores based on the existing databases, or we have to collect some data by ourselves. So here's our key findings. The first finding is that the performance of Belt and Road countries on this index shows some correlation with the economic level of each country. To be more specific, you can imagine that for the least developed countries, they are scoring very low. And the main reason for their low score is their lack of power supply. So based on the first conclusion, we have some suggestions. Like developing countries in Belt and Road should take into account the growth potential of their electricity demand when they're formulating their energy development strategies. And another suggestion is we have to enhance the cooperation in power sector along the Belt and Road countries. So this kind of cooperation will greatly reduce the difficulty of a low carbon transition of this power generation system or power generation sector. And finally, these are our next steps. So firstly, we are going to include more indicators and more data. And secondly, we are going to adjust the weight setting because weight is very important in this kind of research. So we are going to adjust the weight through a combination of subjective and objective methods. And finally, we are going to explore more ways to tap into those scoring results. For example, we are going to use cluster analysis to try to categorize those countries in the Belt and Road platform. Yeah, that's my presentation, and thank you so much. Welcome your questions.
Thank you so much. I'll invite Hadia for the Q&A.
Thank you, Keith. This was very interesting. One question that comes to mind is when you talk about further cooperation in the power sector, what are some examples of that? How could that be achieved?
Okay, so this is very interesting. I mean, in this research, I mainly focus on the cooperation between China and the other countries. So you can imagine China has invested a lot of power generation projects in the Belt and Road countries, for example, in Africa, etc. So, and I want to recall a very recent policy, an announcement done by President Xi to stop the investment on the coal-fired power plant in other countries. So this is a very interesting announcement. And what I want to see is for further cooperation, yes, we have to pursue some, a green energy, renewable energy. This is very important. So we have to enhance the investment in other countries, as well as some capacity building things. For example, we have to give them technology instead of only money, and we have to hire local staff instead of using Chinese stuff or stuff from other countries. So this is very important to help them build their capacity instead of just help them build a factory or a power plant.
And if I could just ask one follow-up question on that, what do you think would be supportive in this endeavor? Would it be foreign policy that is more supportive, financing that is more supportive? Like, how could China be a partner for many of these countries in this pursuit?
Yeah, okay. I think for China, maybe the economic cooperation is the most viable way to further enhance this kind of cooperation. Because the Belt and Road is, as I stated at the very first of my presentation, the Belt and Road platform is a pure economic cooperation platform. So yeah, I think for me, I'm looking forward to see more Chinese companies, and not only those state-owned big companies, but also some private sector companies can have more investment and more cooperation in other countries, and could really bring some social benefit to the local community instead of just earning the money.
Thank you so much, Keith. And then one, I think, final question might be, there have been obviously news reports of shortages for electricity supply around the world. It's been very interesting, prominent to watch. You've mentioned obviously having the Belt and Road taking into account this greater demand. How do you think that, or what might be ways to build in capacity for expecting these increased demand as obviously the world population and our consumption increases?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I also want to mention this kind of a recent very hot topic, the global energy shortage. So for example, the case in China is quite exemplar. So in China, especially the northeast region of China, they experienced a blackout several months ago. So it's quite a huge event in China. So I think for other Belt and Road countries, they also have to plan for this kind of, instability of power systems in advance. So because, the renewable energy can be quite unstable, especially wind power. So when we are developing this kind of green energy, renewable energy system, we have to take into account of their risk, of their instability. And I think this is what most countries are missing now. So yeah, I think risk management is very important.
Thank you so much, Keith. This was very interesting and wonderful presentation. And I will hand it back to you, Alex.
Great. Thank you both so much. And thank you to all of the students who presented today. This was really fascinating, and it's really inspirational and impressive to see all of the hard work that you've done. So it is now my pleasure to introduce Alex Halliday, who is going to be giving the closing remarks for today's event. So Alex is the founding dean of the Columbia Climate School. He is also the director of the Earth Institute at Columbia University. He joined the Earth Institute in April of 2018 after spending more than a decade at the University of Oxford, during which he was Dean of Science and Engineering. With about 400 published research papers, Dr. Halliday has been a pioneer in developing mass spectrometry to measure small isotopic variations. And he has also helped to lead a variety of distinguished scientific societies and advisory panels. He's also a professor in Columbia's Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences. So I'd like to welcome Alex Halliday to give the final closing remarks.
Thanks, Alex. So I'm thrilled to be here today. So wonderful to be here from you at today's Climate X Energy Sub-Forum. Thank you to all of the students for your terrific presentations and to our fantastic Columbia moderators for their involvement. I'm really inspired by students and young people more generally and their fierce dedication to combating the climate crisis. It's having a massive effect that young people are so engaged in this, and we must all work to ensure that the generations to come have a safe and sustainable planet to live on. As you are all aware, the climate crisis is one of the greatest threats facing our world today. Each day brings further evidence of the risks from severe floods and droughts, wildfires, heat waves, sea level rise, and storms, among other major issues. Just here in the United States, the drought in the Western US has been the worst for hundreds of years. We have water shortages and repeated wildfires. In the South and Eastern United States, there is repeated extreme rainfall. So these kind of crazy weather patterns that we're seeing are kind of the part of the global weirding that people talk about that comes with global warming. And they are increasingly severe. And events like this are going to have huge impacts, including loss of life, economic damage, food shortages, adverse public health outcomes, national security risks, and more. But what we experience today in the Western US and in the Southeastern US in its different ways is absolutely nothing compared with what's coming ahead, and in particular what's coming ahead in the tropics. It's pretty clear that many parts of the world are going to be disproportionately impacted by climate change, and many of the parts of the world that have had least to do with causing the problem of climate change are actually going to be the ones who are most severely impacted, and they're the ones who very often have least in the way of resource to actually deal with it. So this is an issue of global governance and ethics that we need to think about, and requires a sort of transdisciplinary way of thinking about what it is we want the world to look like going forward. At the same time as this, the dominant cause of climate change, greenhouse gas emissions from our energy systems and land use, we all know continues to rise every year and exacerbate the problem while we increase the proportion of renewables in our energy mix. The denominators of that fraction, which is the total amount of energy utilized, is going up at an incredible rate as people are lifted out of poverty and as people improve their standards of living, all of which is great, but it is resulting in increased energy consumption. So that means more greenhouse gases, the way things are going at the moment. Despite the growing numbers of countries and companies who recognize the challenge posed by climate change, this gap is widening between what one could call actual greenhouse gas concentrations and the level that we need to get to prevent the worst outcomes. So to achieve the global goal of net zero by 2050, we need an unprecedented transformation of nearly every activity in modern life and across all sectors in the global economy. In particular, we must move with urgency to decarbonize society, which is why today's forum is so important. Roughly 3/4 of greenhouse gases result from the use of fossil fuels for energy. Achieving net zero means transforming all sectors of the global economy: electricity, agriculture, manufacturing, transportation, and buildings. And it's going to require significant increases in energy efficiency, deployment of many technologies at scale, and rapid innovation to advance other kinds of technologies that are going to be needed for the future as viable commercial products. All of this has got to be done in combination with legal policy and permitting frameworks for supporting infrastructure. So this is a massive transformation. The longer we delay, the more massive it needs to be. And universities are crucial to solving this particular kind of issue. because it's so multifaceted, and that's exactly the nature of universities. They involve many different kinds of people from different backgrounds and different technical skills and abilities, which is exactly what you need for addressing this kind of issue. We need to work on these problems together across these disciplines, but also we need to train new climate leaders for the future. One of the key things that we want to focus on, of course, is creating innovative solutions for the future, and in particular around the energy part of it. So this is why it's so important that we engage with people like you. At Columbia, we're building a climate school, which is a completely new entity. Columbia hasn't had a new school for 25 years. It's a major change to the university to do this, but we're also looking to change the way universities work as a result of this. So the school, even though it'll be a sort of hub of activity, will connect across the university and connect with many, many people who are doing major work in this area. Our goal is to equip students with both in-depth knowledge of climate change as well as the practical tools to do something about it. So we're going to focus initially on decarbonization, which includes carbon capture, sequestration and removal, zero carbon synthetic fuels like hydrogen and ammonia, urban decarbonization, how do we decarbonize buildings, particularly places like New York City, and energy access and economic development. Of course, the climate problem can't be solved by one institution. What we're going to do at Columbia is just a part of it, and I've just talked about the decarbonization. There's a whole lot of work we're going to do on adaptation as well, but we can't do it all ourselves. We have to work with other partners. And that's why working together in partnerships with other universities, with government, communities and business and civil society is so important. So I'm thrilled that we are part of GAUC. GAUC's mission is to advance climate change solutions through research, education, and public outreach. We really value connecting with peer universities around the world on a variety of projects. And we really have feel very thankful to the GAUC Secretariat at Tsinghua University for the excellent organization of this week's event in particular. So in closing, I want to thank everyone again for who has presented today, and also congratulate those for completing their final papers for the academic track. We all are inspired by your work. I wish you the very best for your studies going forward. Thank you very much.